Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 24th of November 2023. It's a little bit later because I've been trying to get an article finished. It's a behemoth article on Russian interference in European elections and the rise of the far right across Europe, and how that's got the fingerprints of Russia all over it. But it's, the more you write it, the more you're like, oh, I've got to put that in, and oh my goodness, it's huge. Russian influence in Europe is huge. Anyway, sorry about that, and just listening a lot to the Wombats. Music tip today, Let's Dance to Joy Division by the Wombats. Love that song. Anyway, moving on, it's irrelevant. Let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find the caveats to that in the description to this video below. And we have some big numbers posted. So we saw an uptick yesterday as a result of, I guess, getting over some of the weather issues, or the weather not being quite so bad. I think the weather it had an effect on frontline activities over the weekend, and we saw yesterday an uptick, and then today today's figures for yesterday going much higher again in the categories of tanks, APVs and artillery. So 1,100 personnel is a big number. 30 tanks is huge. 32 APVs is huge, and 31 artillery systems is huge. I mean, the Russians, even if, as I keep saying, if you took 30% off that, 20 tanks, over 20 APVs, 20 artillery systems. These are huge numbers. You don't want to be losing that on a daily basis, and it appears that the Russians have. Really significant. 2 multiple launch rocket systems and 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems. When you talk about the counter offensive, whether it's a success or not, I mean, lots of people are talking about this. Dom Nichols talking about this on Ukraine the Latest very explicitly. Charles Michel from the European Union was talking about this. There are different ways of measuring the counter offensive, and you can measure it in terms of territory gained, in which case, Ukrainians didn't hit what they wanted at all. They didn't get to Tokmak. They didn't get to the Sea of Azov, not even remotely close. Okay, but then they kind of stopped that after a week in the way that they were hoping to advance, and then went about degrading Russian capabilities that ended up getting the Black Sea Fleet moved from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. So that's massively eventful and huge consequences to the Ukrainian activity here. And you see that continuing. And they need to continue this until they get to a point where Russia are unable to withstand a further counteroffensive. Now, I think I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'll go to it now. This is concerning what Zelensky said yesterday, and I've already read this to you. I read this to you yesterday, but it's so important. So Zelensky talks about 5 reasons why the strengthening of Ukraine's air defense is the best strategic security investment. First and foremost, every system and missile provided to Ukraine saves lives. Second, it protects the cities. Third, the stronger their air defense, the more success they have in the Black Sea. And grain export and so on and so forth. Fourth, each of additional air defense system and missile saves resources that would otherwise be required to recover the destroyed objects and the critical infrastructure. They don't need to fix up what's blown up if that stuff doesn't get blown up. Fifth, denying Russia the ability to terrorize Ukraine with missiles and drones will force the aggressor to abandon the tactic. And that will help bring the overall effort will help the overall effort to bring victory closer. Now, what he's not mentioning here is 6, and I think the biggest one, and I'm sure this is part of it. You cannot advance on the front line without changing something, right? So they can keep doing what Russia do, which is hitting their head against a brick wall by doing Vuhledar 2.0 in Avdiivka. Yeah, you can do that, but that's going to cost you so much that you will end up having nothing left in the tank. You might take some territory eventually, but at what cost? Now, the Ukrainians could have done that, say in Robotyne. They could have kept on throwing stuff at the front lines, but then getting bogged down on minefields and then getting hit by aviation. Russian aviation at the moment is a massive challenge. They have an advantage. It's not a superiority, and it's definitely not a supremacy. They have an advantage, and they're using that to drop these FAB guided glide bombs. And that's one of the things that's happening. Now, the Ukrainians, without changing that scenario, will just be throwing their equipment at those front lines and getting hit by those ATGMs, mines, artillery, and aviation. So they are having to change the situation before they go again. And they cannot go again until they degraded the Russian capabilities in terms of all of these pieces of equipment, all these categories: anti-aircraft warfare systems, MLRS, artillery, and tanks, and logistics. 32 vehicles and fuel tanks lost yesterday. One piece of special equipment. Okay. So it is going to be about degrading those bits of equipment at the front line, but things like the air defense equipment behind the front line, and then bringing their own air defense equipment to bear on the front line. So we can talk about making the city safe and doing all those things he's just talked about, but part of that will be we cannot attack until we get some kind of air advantage, and we're not going to send our F-16s that are just getting trained up at the end of spring. We're not going to send them to give close air support to our troops unless our F-16s are safe. We're not going to go through the whole rigmarole of getting these F-16s, training people up, and then sending them to get shot down. So you have to have those F-16s won't be used. Well, you can use them to shoot down cruise missiles and drones behind your own lines, inside Ukraine. Of course you can. But to use them really effectively in supporting a counteroffensive, they will not get used until suppression of enemy air defense has taken place. And that will also include suppression of enemy air forces. And you can only do that with anti-aircraft warfare systems. So we'll see again, talk about this German Patriot that's going to be put in place this winter. You've got 5 more Patriots. You've got 4 IRIS-Ts from Germany again. You've got all sorts of air defense being talked about, pledged, and delivered. That is why that is a number one concern. It is, yes, about protection of their facilities and infrastructure within Ukraine, and then it's surely got to be about taking out Russian air assets so that the Ukraine can prosecute a successful counteroffensive going forward. They can't do what they tried to do. There's no point doing that again. Yes, they can degrade all this stuff on the ground, but they need to degrade the Russian Air Force. Okay, going on to Andrew Perpetua's counting up of lost equipment over the last 24 hours by looking at the socials. And as you can see, we've got back to an overwhelming loss of Russian compared to Ukrainian equipment. Let's look at the Ukrainian equipment, bit of surveillance comms. Caesar doesn't look good to lose a Caesar to a Lancet. You can see all these Lancets being used again. They must have basically built a load more Lancets. We're seeing them used. We're seeing them get used at night as well. Whether that is destroyed is another question, because Lancers do have a tendency to bounce off, to cause minimal damage at times, as well as obviously causing catastrophic damage too. They're quite variable. So it'll be interesting to see, the true effect of these Lancets. There's 3 tanks, unknown tanks there. Whether the footage is poor or whether they've been so fundamentally blown up, it's hard to tell. I don't know. Senator APC there, that's from Canada. You've got a Max Pro from the US, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, and an old BTR BTR-4 infantry fighting vehicle. So some possibly fairly high-value stuff, but then when we look at the Russian, there's a lot more of it. You might argue that the equipment isn't as high value. It's difficult to know comparing to tanks, but there are 4 tanks here, T-72, T-80, and an unknown. You've got a load of surveillance and comms equipment. You've got a bridge layer. I'll show you that bridge layer in a minute. You've got a boat, a bunch of infantry fighting vehicles, slightly more modern ones actually compared to overwhelming proportion of BMP-1s that we often see. And then a lot of trucks and civilian vehicles. So you can see that if we go back to the general staff figures of 32 vehicles and fuel tanks will be reflected in this high number of trucks and civilian vehicles. Okay, moving on. In terms of the loss of people, incredible video from the city of Kostroma in Russia. It's about the size of Stoke in England or Irving in Texas, so not a huge place, but it's got a huge graveyard full of recently dead Russian soldiers. The war cemetery just keeps getting bigger and bigger. These are the bodies returned. Others are burned in mobile cemeteries or crematoria, or listed as missing. So in fact, you will have, I would have thought, a relatively small percentage of bodies that are actually returned. So when you do look at a war cemetery like this, which is massive, covered in recently constructed graveyards with brand new headstones and all these flags denoting all the different units and whatever, this is a significant number of people, and that's representative of high Russian losses. It really is. So yeah, it is another interesting reflection there. Andrew Perpetua then talks about the irony of losing a bridge layer to water. So he had that bridge layer on his list up here, Kamaz bridge layer, and here it is. There's an irony of losing it to water, so to the very substance it's supposed to be overcoming, and the FPV drone coming to light it on fire didn't help. So I believe that was then later taken out by drones. And here we have Russia on fire. This is in the center of Moscow, and it's a restaurant. Ceiling caught fire. Diners managed to escape. So, probably nothing to do with the war. But my goodness, they have some big old fires on a daily basis, don't they? Incredible. And there's another fire in Moscow, but I think that's a strike. It's a little bit uncertain, but it almost certainly is. I would say. Overnight, Russia attacked with 3 Shahed drones. All of them were destroyed. Not the biggest night of Russian attacks. Explosions were heard on Khmelnytsky region. That's more into the interior of Ukraine. Preliminary air defense operation. We were waiting for official information. So who knows exactly what that was about. Then we heard this. This is quite significant because it shows, and we heard this with the Russians the other day. When you hear about these award ceremonies or funerals, you don't want to be telling people. These need to be kept secret, especially near the front line. So the attack on Chornobivka. So Chornobivka was here. I can't show you imagery of it because some of it is unsuitable. Here's a video of Chornobivka near Kherson, where it seems beyond doubt that today Russian tried to commit a massacre similar to Hroza. So what happened at Hroza? There was a funeral that they hit and killed 59 people, and those people were broadly civilians, right? And it's a war crime as far as I'm concerned. They've done the same here, but what's the story? The attack on Chornobivka in Kherson was a deliberate attempt by Russia to hit a military funeral. So yesterday, the Kherson non-fake Telegram channel expressed outrage, and rightfully so, that the local council publicized the full details of a funeral. Shells landed there at 12:15. Thankfully, the time had been changed. So although I don't know if there's loss of life, but there's certainly imagery with blood and all sorts. This is a situation where they advertise, mistakenly, or not by mistake, on purpose, but thoughtlessly advertise a funeral, a military funeral. The Russians, obviously looking at Telegram, find out about that. It's like, right, we want to hit there at this time. So the shells landed at 12:15, but they'd actually changed the time of the funeral subsequently, and luckily got away with without the loss of life that there might well have been. So the funeral will take place at 12 o'clock near the arch, and then 12:15 near the arch, you get a load of shells landing. So this is not good news, or it is good news, but it's not good news to hear such obvious communication of sensitive targets, potential targets. Right. 5 villages in Kursk region face a night without heat and electricity after shelling by Ukraine, according to Russia. Power lines in the village of Neonilovka are said to be damaged. 350 residents are affected, so there's still activity from the Ukrainians within Russia. I don't know whether that is just artillery shelling, multiple launch rocket systems, or something else. The mayor of temporarily occupied Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, reports explosions in the city. So the Ukrainians are hitting Melitopol still. We don't hear about it every night, but I'm fairly sure things are pretty regularly hitting Melitopol. I don't know what the damage is. And then there was talk about Jankoy, maybe as many as 7 explosions being heard in the Jankoy area. This is significant because there's a Russian airbase there. It's a logistics hub. There's all sorts of depots in Jankoy. It's quite often targeted by the Ukrainians. As you can see there, something is lighting up big time. So that is a significant hit on Jankoy by the Ukrainians. And then it goes back to kind of, this degradation over time of all of this equipment, and that includes logistics hubs, it includes depots and dumps, equipment. It is hopefully getting to a point where the Russians are unable to attack effectively or unable to defend effectively. Okay, now we're going to what Russia says about this. So it said it forward a massive attack, that it allegedly shot down 13 drones in Crimea and 3 in Volgograd. So the Russians claim they shot down 16 drones. However, when you've got pictures of really big explosions and fire taking place, you're fairly sure that the Russians aren't really telling the truth. In the latter, it's known a drone exploded at a military unit, so in Volgograd, but of course officially no damage. And then this one in Moscow, that is I say another substation. It might be the same substation that was on fire 2 nights ago, or was it the night before? Not last night, the night before, where it was on fire and no one kind of knew why. They claimed it was a short circuit. I don't know if that's the same one. There are different claims, but nonetheless, electricity substations going up in flames in Moscow is never a good thing for the Russians. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. We talked about that air defense, the primacy of air defense for Ukrainian desires. We're going to just mention this. This went a little bit. Well, this hit the mainstream news actually yesterday. BBC has traced the stolen child of Ukraine to Russia. And what's more, the war criminal is a Russian member of parliament who is also, of course, a big Putin supporter. So the details here are of Sergei Mironov, 70-year-old leader of a Russian political party, named on the adoption record of a 2-year-old girl who was taken in 2022 by a woman who he is now married to. Records show the girl's identity was changed in Russia. Mr. Mironov has not responded to the investigation's specific allegations, but on Thursday morning he posted a general criticism on his Telegram account about false information attacks on him and his family. The child, originally named Margarita, was one of 48 who went missing from Kherson Regional Children's Home when Russian forces took control of the city. They're among about 20,000 children who, according to the Ukrainian government, have been taken by Russian forces since the start of the full-scale invasion. I mean, war crimes. This is what both Putin and Belova are having, why they have international criminal court arrest warrants slapped on their heads. Right, and finally, I'm not going to show you the pictures, although I think he's only injured at this stage. But this is the journalist, scare quotes journalist, working for Russia 24 in occupied Zaporizhia. He was injured, I think, in a shelling, and then was taken to hospital and died in hospital. Russia's army TV channel bizarrely showed a video the moments after he was hit. Maksudov. Why it's bizarre is, well, one, like, why are you showing injured journalists? Okay, maybe to talk about the outrage of the journalists getting hit by the Ukrainians. Oh my goodness, this is terrible. However, it also shows him not wearing a press vest. So he's literally dressed in Russian army uniform. So you've got a supposed journalist dressed in Russian army uniform, then getting hit by Ukrainian shells. You're like, yeah, Yeah, what's your problem here? You got how are they able to tell? And even if it is just shelling, if you're anywhere where there is routine shelling, then you've taken your life into your own hands. I mean, you're a brave journalist, maybe, but there's a non-zero chance, actually, a fairly sizable chance of you getting hit. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'm going to get on with the second video and get that article out. I'll let you know about the article because it pertains to most of what I'm talking about on this channel. So I'll let you know when it's out. In the meantime, toodle pips.